Um, I'm honored to be here with people in the room, and I would really welcome hearing the dialogue running through all of your heads, because I think there's so much experience to offer. So hopefully we hear from you in response to our panel comments. I'm talking about trends in the Corn Belt, and by using that name, I think it's tells a lot that we talk about the middle part of this country, and it has had a profound and dominant influence on farm policy because of the combination of wonderful soils with a climate that supports rain-fed agriculture. So here we can have, with fairly modest inputs compared to some other places in the world that want to match our yields, to support reliable grain production, in part because we get rain, but also because our soils supply a lot of fertility and have a high water holding capacity. Combined with that, a history of development of infrastructure in the form of actual physical capital and trading systems in what we call the sort of capital of the Midwest in Chicago and trade, and farm policies that basically combine, I think, to form this sort of holy trinity of commodity agriculture. That I appreciate other comments about diversity. Now, underneath that or surrounding that in the fringes are lots of other agricultures, but the name, the Corn Belt, which we all identify with so much, is because of this really fantastic crop that we've thrown a lot of effort at, right? Maize, right? We've quadrupled the yields of that crop. Yet we know from long-term studies in the Mora plots, when we compare that full input corn and its yield potential, we've lowered that by 1/4 when we compare what that grain can yield in the conventionally managed soils against the soils that have been under a more diversified rotation as compared to the corn and soybeans. So we see fantastic successes and what we have lost. And that's a very narrow metric that I'm talking about. And these kinds of metrics about productivity, yield, inputs, and costs around that production are highly broadcast, highly measured. When we all look at our metrics that we're using, see, these are the things that are supported. We hear on the radio, projections for yield by USDA. We know how much rain there is in competing markets around the country. So we are bombarded with information around this iconic crop of maize and tied our fortunes to it as a society very much. And we've had some successes, but we look at some of the costs, and we are trying to grapple with how to bring in the value of what else could be. And when we talk about trade-off accounting, for example, when we look at the loss of wetlands, in this region we've lost, in the northern reaches, 70% of wetlands. In the southern portion of the Corn Belt, as much as nearly 100% of the wetlands have been lost. And the productivity of fisheries, or what could have been. And I'm not telling anybody in this room something that they don't know. I go back and I read things that Eugene Odom wrote about cost of fisheries in the South in 1976. We know this, and despite this, and despite indicators that show up but aren't collected in this sort of blanket form, right? Everybody's been using metrics that are supported by and collected by governing bodies, either by the federal government or by the state government. We've had lots of little canaries in the coal mine by individual researchers that show up, changes in sexual reproduction of amphibian species, or well contamination, things that we actually can monitor. I think earlier points about following metabolites. People have raised these issues, but they haven't been able to sustain the argument, collect the data coverage, and worry about trends. And I think that we do have a tremendous amount of knowledge and about the problems, and I think that this was a point raised earlier about, sort of invisible indicators. So we have some very strong indicators, and the strongest of which are monetized in the Midwest, and I appreciate your points.
1 minute.
1 minute. Ooh, holy smokes. I see those Russian nesting dolls. So inside that nesting doll is our fundamental resource endowment. And my co-authors, Matt Liebman and Casey Hoy, we work and we know very much, this is old hat about the biophysical measures, and we know through distributed research how to manage things well. What we don't know is how to marry this with our social indicators and with what people really, really want. And I think that we have some of these indicators and some of this data collected by other entities, but the sort of social organizations and how they come together to take the data that we have or ask for data that they want to make nuanced and localized solutions possible is really difficult. So I was really struck when I read the papers where people talked about where data was and where sort of we go from information to wisdom to action, that Kathy included in her source of data were social organizations, right? And I see that as very important, and I also see myself this we have a social consensus. You use the word movement, which I think makes some of us uncomfortable about a movement, but the truth is the public and industry have moved on without using academia to the extent that we might hope that they would. And it's not that we don't have a lot to offer, it's that we aren't putting our knowledge into action. So we have hypotheses that are social hypotheses. We have amazingly innovative action by hospitals trying to get local food produced or healthy food produced. I rode her on the airplane next to the person who was in charge of our Head Start program, and she told me how she was working with a local caterer to get ethnically sensitive foods grown locally into her schools. And so she's light years ahead of where a lot of our institutions might be. So I'd say I think that the game is on, and we need to bring this and figure out how to bring our metrics together and to not avoid, basically, I think we have a lot of fear around metrics that are numerate that pick winners and losers. And we are learning very, very fast. So the story of the ethanol metrics are profoundly important to us. And if we can get through it and we can listen to people about what they want and improve our numbers and not look backwards. So we may have numbers about failed technologies or bad examples, and instead we should look forward to what could be done, right?